Hi everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of Trans Stupid, the show where I take a look at the wonderful, magical, fantastical world of LGBTQIA+++++ news, because stupidity is intersectional. So you're probably noticing there's a little bit of a different setup this week. Well, just to give you a little bit of an update on where my life currently is, I've now moved out of the hellscape that is central London. I'm currently hiding away in North Wales for the next couple of weeks before getting my own place again. So just for the time being, get used to this backdrop, get used to this nice big comfy chair as we just take a bit of a chill and go over what you are all here to listen about, which is, of course, the insanity that has been going on in 2020 with the fantastic world of intersectional identity politics. And the first story that I'm going to talk about this week, I'm going to pose you all a question. What do you call an individual with a cervix? Don't answer that. Like, I know my viewers are probably sitting back thinking, I know this, but be careful, because if you say anything, well, you're probably transphobic. This, of course, relates to a CNN tweet posted a few days ago where they mentioned individuals with a cervix are now recommended to start cervical cancer screenings at 25 and continue through to age 65 with HPV testing every 5 years as the preferred method of testing, according to a new guideline released by the American Cancer Society. So note the way they started that, individuals with a cervix. And naturally, CNN is not the only news outlet, or indeed the only kind of source out there that now refers to people with female anatomy just as being individuals with insert issue here. In fact, you've seen a lot of discussions coming from medical bodies, coming from politicians, coming from basically public figures, acting as though we now have a whole new language that nobody else has really opted into except for the hyper-woke. This is a huge issue, and naturally CNN received a ton of backlash, including recent woke crusader Piers Morgan going back to his old usual self. The reason why this is such a problem is because over time you'll see language progress, and that is often the argument you will hear from trans activists, or indeed the woke left, that words do change their meanings, and that is naturally true. But that's not really what's happening here. Instead, we're seeing more that words are changing their meanings based on a committee that nobody really has any kind of input into. And then as soon as these new meanings are put out into the public sphere, speaking out against it can't get you deemed a transphobe, or maybe even led to you being cancelled, so to speak. And that is a massive problem. If you want people to understand a new meaning for a word, you need to allow that meaning to progress naturally and to evolve naturally. Just to kind of add a little bit of an explainer on this, a lot of people hear these kinds of languages and always assume, well, it's trans women who are pushing this because they don't want to be left out of the term woman. That's not really what's happened here. Instead, what we've seen is that this relates to trans men, or female non-binary people, aka people who are biologically female and therefore have a cervix. And it's always pointed at this is the more inclusive way of talking about this. But I'm sure a lot of trans men, and I'm sure a lot of non-binary people will understand fundamentally that they are biologically female. They would not be trans, or they wouldn't be non-binary if they weren't. So they naturally have to understand that. They cannot be so indoctrinated that they refuse to admit it in a private conversation. And so what we're looking at really is just changing terms and the way in which we speak to appease a very small minority which ultimately aren't impacted much by this current use of language. Are we really expected to believe that a trans man wouldn't understand his risk of cervical cancer simply because the wording says woman? I somehow doubt it. I don't think many trans men are going to be sitting back and thinking, well, I'm completely impervious to cervical cancer because I've self-identified out of the risk factor. Like, of course they haven't. And, of course, this can lead into trouble if you decide that actually the term should be woman, as Rosie Duffield, a Labour MP, Labour, not horrible right-wing Tory, but Labour, saying that, well, this is just another word for woman. And naturally, she got a lot of flack. She even pointed out that, well, this seems like quite a bit of a communist revolution against her, and she's kind of right. I mean, a lot of the people who are pushing these new definitions are certainly on the left to far left. Although, being a Labour MP, she is probably a part of the reason why these people have got so much cultural power in the UK as it is. But despite her politics being right on, as some people might say, she still got into a lot of trouble, and I've now found that people are gunning for her to be removed from the party for unspeakable hate. I mean, this is the same party that has a massive anti-Semitism problem, but, you know, that pales in comparison to using the word woman. All of this is kind of absurd, and if you looked at this from 10 years ago thinking that people would really be arguing about the term woman, then you'd be forgiven for thinking we must be living in clown world, and to be honest, you'd be absolutely right to say that. But a further problem with this kind of narrative is that it kind of comes from an all or nothing response to language, which we've been seeing quite a lot over the last couple of years. For example, the arguments about whether a woman has a cervix, because some women might have a medical condition which means that they don't have that. And by woman, I am referring to biological human females. And they use this kind of total all or nothing response simply to kind of control that narrative and say, well, because not all women have this or that problem, then you can't say that being a woman is about having that. And that kind of is like saying that the sky isn't blue. What I mean by that is, we all take it for granted that the sky is, of course, blue, but sometimes the sky is red, sometimes the sky is grey, sometimes the sky can be all sorts of different colours. So saying that the sky is blue is a false statement because it isn't always blue, despite the fact that we all know that to be a truth. Or how about the ocean? I mean, is the ocean filled with water? Well, you know, it also has ships in it, it also has fish, it also has coral, it has rocks, it has seals. So you can't just say that the ocean is filled with water. It's the same kind of arguments, because it seems to be that we can't make that as a total statement because there's a lot of other things going on around it. And a lot of people don't quite get on board with that, and they're never going to. Why should they? And this also leads into a recent Twitter argument about 2 + 2 = 5. You know, that famous saying from 1984. Well, it turns out that even saying that could be transphobic because it's denying the existence of trans women. The left not realising that they're actually showing their cards too early as to how absurd they can really take all of this. We shouldn't be allowing this kind of changing of language to go without having a proper conversation on it, and that is kind of what we're seeing over the last couple of years. Words are changing their meanings from what we can all know and accept, and hell, even as a trans woman, I understand what the term woman is. I would not be a trans woman if I didn't, and I certainly would have nothing to transition to if the term woman had no meaning. I mean, do I have to point out to examples as to why it's absurd to say that anyone can be a woman if they simply say so? I mean, look at this guy. Like, this is someone who is now apparently a moderator of a lesbian group called Girls Love Travel. And that person is a non-transitioning trans woman who is happy staying as a guy, but still wants to be referred to as a female, and still wants to use female pronouns and loves all things girly, so it's therefore a woman. That's the kind of person, when we talk about the term woman not being open to everyone, we don't want people like that to be able to take advantage of it. And when I say about trans women being women, again, that I understand that there's a lot of trans women out there who completely understand biology and why we transition. But when you open these terms to mean absolutely nothing, you do allow abuse, and that is why there are a lot of people getting upset as to why they can't just identify as a woman anymore. So the next thing that I want to talk about is kind of a new segment for Trans Stupid, where I'm coming across a lot of articles, say like it's from the Crazy Vault, where people have said some incredibly insane stuff in various editorials, and it goes under the radar. But I kind of want to put a spotlight on some of this, because some of these are very, very, very special. And this week's special topic is why the term transition is transphobic. So apparently the author of this is someone called Mux Van Levi. Now, Levi is a therapist and a counsellor and is also non-binary, biologically male, and this is someone basically telling the rest of the trans community not to use such a phrase because it's insulting to him, somebody who isn't transitioning. This kind of leads into why a lot of people like myself get very frustrated with the non-binary community when they pretend to speak for us, as though they have some sort of special insight that the people who actually have a lived experience of being trans don't somehow have. But let's have a look at some of the really bizarre claims that he makes in this article. The term transition is based on the idea that gender looks a certain way and people need to change from looking, sounding, acting and more a certain way for their identity to be respected. Well, yes, that is perfectly fine. If you are transitioning from being a man to a woman, you will need to look the way that society expects a woman to look if you want to be treated as such. You cannot simply change the definition of woman. We talked about this earlier. You can't change the definition of woman just based off a committee. It is going to be something in which society has to accept. When we are born, doctors assign us a gender based on our external genitalia, which is rooted in transphobia because they are basing it off the idea that men have penises and women have vaginas. Well, generally women have penises. Generally women have vaginas and men have penises. Like, that's always been the way throughout human history until basically the last couple of decades, really. I don't think that back in ancient Egypt or ancient Rome they devised this whole system just to bring down the tranners in the 20th century, but, who knows. The reality is we are who we are, and our outside appearance does not change who we are on the inside. We then navigate the world with the assumption that if a doctor told me so, then this must be true. For some of us, who we are does not match what the world has told us. The term transition implies we were once one gender and are now another, but that is not the case. We are and always have been our gender. It may have just taken us a while to find the words, support, understand knowledge, and or much more to affirm ourselves and our identities. Our outward appearance does not dictate and/or represent who we are. Well, your outward appearance does at least indicate how others will treat you. If you look like this, for example, you are not going to be treated as anything other than a man. That's simple as. But then when this guy is talking about how we were one gender and are now another, I don't know whether I can really agree with that. Whilst I've certainly known throughout my life that I was trans or along those lines, I still spent a good period of my time before transitioning living as a male. So I've had those experiences. And then transitioning into being a woman has given me a whole different set of experiences. And I, therefore, have kind of built my own knowledge of the world based on those two different experiences which I have had. It's not enough just to say, well, I was always been a woman, because I certainly have not always been treated as one. If I had been, then I would not be transitioning. When a cis person takes hormones that their body is not producing enough of, we do not label their experience as a transition. Yeah, the reason for that, by the way, is because if a man needs to take more testosterone, it isn't because he is less of a man or is needing to become more of a man or anything along those lines. Similar with a woman who's going through menopause. That's just medical treatment. When you are doing a medical transition, however, you do kind of need to go through various medical processes if you want to be comfortable with your body. The fact that this guy actually tries to compare the two is well, I don't have any words for that, really. The rest of the article is just discussing terms like internalised transphobia and talking about how problematic basically everyone is. But it ends with this fairly strange paragraph. Our community is suffering and experiencing chronic violence while accepting the knowledge cis folks are imposing on us. We justify that it is okay because our oppressors, whose oppression we are unaware of most of the time, have empowered us with language for our experience. Can you see the irony in someone who holds privilege and power empowering someone on their own experience and/or identity? Well, I kind of play the card there a little bit on where they're coming from. A lot of this is very postmodern, a lot of this is kind of Marxist in nature, talking about positions of privilege and oppression. I don't really see it in that way. I don't think many people really do. This isn't a case that we are experiencing chronic violence, as I've discussed on numerous occasions. Ultimately, these are just the ramblings of a mad zer or whatever. But I want to kind of feature more of these on my channel. So if you come across any, please send it in the email down below. I'm glad to have a look at it. But the last story that I want to touch on this week involves J.K. Rowling, who is becoming one of the biggest names in the trans community over 2020, even bigger than COVID, apparently. So, yeah, J.K. Rowling, apparent queen of the TERFs nowadays, has taken the title from Graham Linehan as the one person that all the kind of woke media seems to be going after. Well, it was her birthday the other day, and to kind of celebrate, a little poster was put up in a train station. In fact, it was Edinburgh Waverley Station, and the poster just said, "I love J.K. Rowling," which is simply just a statement of saying J.K. Rowling. But it was removed. It was removed because it was too political. And so that's kind of been celebrated a lot on the trans side. On the radfam side, they've discussed how this is misogyny, that they should not be tearing down any kind of posters like this. But the reason why I want to talk about this is, like, it is kind of ingenious, really. So the poster was the brainchild of Posy Parker, who I've discussed a lot on this channel, really. For those who don't quite know who she is, Posy Parker is, I would probably just summarize as being kind of an anti-trans activist, gender critical. She isn't a radical feminist in any kind of way, but she has been incredibly critical of trans people. She holds a lot of very strong views, some of which I probably would consider to be anti-trans. I have met Posy in the past, and when we met, we got along really, really well. I thought that she was actually really, really nice. I am aware that if we probably met now, she probably wouldn't be quite so friendly, but one can hope. However, I really wanted to talk about this because as much as Posy Parker has positions that I disagree with, I kind of have a little bit of respect when she does things like this. So Posy Parker first really came to the public's attention when she got a billboard up saying woman, adult, human, female, basically taking the dictionary definition of a woman. It was a very, very simple statement, but that was considered transphobic and was ultimately taken down. Now, that is kind of why Posy did that in the first place. She is no doubt aware that that was ultimately the end goal here. That people would flip out over something so simple. Just the definition of woman is considered hateful. So by that logic, it shows how insane the kind of identity politics driven intersectional trans movement has become. And this I Love J.K. Rowling poster is just another extension of that. It was a simple statement, I love J.K. Rowling, but that is now controversial. Would Edinburgh's rail network taken the same kind of steps if it was someone saying, I love Munro Bergdorf or I love Paris Lees? Probably not. However, because this is someone who has now become a persona non grata, of course they were going to take action. And as a result, the trans lobby does look very censorious because it was ultimately someone from that made the complaint to remove it. That does look like censorship, and I can understand why Posy would make these kinds of statements out there, because it's allowing the trans lobby to effectively play themselves and to ultimately show their hand, and everyone can then see how insane all of this is going. But I just wanted to quickly touch on that because it was something which I found very impressive. So just before I end this, just a couple of things. I know that my content has kind of dried up over the last couple of weeks. As I mentioned at the start, I've been going through quite a lot with the move. However, I am really, really hoping that I will be able to make more content now. I have a new camera, so you might have noticed the quality is a little bit different. I'm still working on the sound, so I apologise if this doesn't sound amazing. But just before I go, one more point. I would like to start highlighting some good news as well, because there's got to be some good things that are happening within the LGBTQIA++ community. So if you have any good news that you would like me to comment on, please send me an email about it, and then I'll try and my best to mention it in the show. But until next time, thank you all so much for watching, as I've now taken a bit of a sabbatical from work and I don't really have much of an income coming in. I would greatly appreciate it if people are able to support me on likes of Patreon or Subscribestar. Of course, don't worry if you can't. I know this is a tough time for everyone. But Seal of Approval will be back on Thursday. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time. And a special thank you to Alex Meadows, Alyssa Morris, Aurora T. Silver, Casey Adolphson, Dan Norman, Ada Meadows, Vanilla Cooney, James C. George, James UK, Janine Karen, Jess, Joe, Kim Vandry, Latin Creature, Moy Felicita, Nova B, Rezi, Ricardo Jose, Steve Hendricks, Tennessee Barfly, The Poor of Rizzo, Zoe, Stefan Hansen, Laisha, and all of my supporters on Patreon and Subscribestar.